This is for perfect competition. You want to take a moment, pause it, and copy this down. What looks similar to you in this graph to perfect competition in the product market? What you should have said is that supply and demand have the same shape, and then the intersection of those points, carry that dot all the way over to the second graph, and bam, you have a straight line shooting across. In the product market, that's demand, but in the labor market, it's supply. So it's good to have practice with those graphs. Put them, the product market and the labor market, by each other and see if you can tell the difference. So you have the price of labor, the wage rate on the y-axis, quantity of labor for the market on the x-axis. You have your supply and demand. One thing you want to add to this demand curve is that it equals the MRP, the marginal revenue product. The intersection is the equilibrium wage. So the firm has no control over that. So they have to make that the wage, which then becomes their supply curve. So follow the dotted line all the way to the second graph. Bam, there's your supply. And your MRP also equals demand for that. So you have the quantity and price of labor. We're not going to do it here, but let's say that there was a shift in demand in the market. That's the first graph. Pretend like you're making a new demand curve, shift it to the right. Notice the intersection point would be higher, which would make the labor supply go up. You may have a question like that in the free response where something happens where the demand for labor goes up, and so that would raise the wage in the market, but also then the supply would increase for the firm. So make a new line for that. Well, look, the new intersection point, the quantity of labor would be less when the demand increased for labor because wages went up, and that intersects for the firm the demand at an earlier point. So you should draw those things out. Replay that slide and draw those things out. Just to answer the questions, number 10, which curve represents the demand? MRP. Supply and perfect competition is perfectly elastic, or you can put constant, and I don't know what the third thing I was thinking in there. Don't worry about it. I can't remember. 12, what is derived demand? This is when the demand, I know what I was going to say with 11. Supply and perfect competition is also the wage for the firm. Derived demand is when a firm demands something demands labor because of the demand for the product itself. So you don't demand labor for labor's sake. It's derived. You get it from somewhere else. So you want the labor because people in society want the good that labor produces. iPods, for example. If the demand for the iPod went up, well, the demand for workers that make iPods go up. So the demand for the worker depends on the product that they are making. Very important. And then 13, what are the determinants of resource demand and which curve would it shift? So let's do some practice questions here. If demand for labor, what would happen to the demand for labor if the demand for the product decreases? Right, it would go down. You don't want iPods, you don't need workers to make it. B, if labor is more productive, right, the demand for labor goes up. Ooh, I want that because they are really productive. C, if the price of a substitute resource falls, then the demand for labor decreases. I can get a substitute, forget that labor, I can get maybe a cheaper machine, so the demand for the labor would go down. Price of a complement resource rises, demand would go down. Now it's more expensive to use both of them, so you want less of it. Remember 14 in the previous unit, utility maximizing, look at the graph. Product market, MUX over price of X equals MUY over price of Y. Well, same thing in the resource market, same setup. You can either do the product maximizing equation, which is marginal product of X over price of X equals MPY over price of Y. Usually you do this when you're comparing labor and capital. So marginal product of labor over its price equals marginal product of capital over its price. Or least cost would be MRPX over PX equals MRPY over PY. So they're either going to give you MP or MRP. It's the same thing with the product market. If those two things don't equal each other, let's say, write this down, 3 equals 1. Well, in order to get on the left side, to get that to go down, you have to have the MRP, the numerator, go down. Well, how do you get MRP to go down? You hire less workers. So it's the opposite of what you assume. And you can look at those and practice problems later. Okay, imperfect competition. Hit pause, write the graph down. Notice the difference. Demand is the same, MRP. The difference here is supply is not perfectly elastic, and it splits in two. Just like demand splits into MR and demand and non-perfect competition, imperfect competition, downward demand curve, and MRC and supply split. MRC will always be your above your supply. I want you to write this down because it's not on here. Write the word monopsony. MONOPSONY. That just means non-perfect competition. So this is called monopsony or imperfect competition. Write that down. MRP equals MRC is for our quantity. Take it all the way down. Then bam, down the supply curve. That is your wage. Practice it. Make it second nature. You can't have shifts, and I would draw that in another color. If supply in moves, then MRC moves. They are linked together. So if supply of labor goes down because population decreases, your MRC moves with it. So you have your new MRC curve intersecting your old demand curve, MRP. You get your quantity, go down to the new supply curve to get your wage. Very important. Last graph has to do with the resource and input. Well, what goes into making products? Borrowed money. You got to borrow it. So real easy supply and demand, especially if you do macro. Supply of funds has to do with banking. If people save more money, there's more money in the bank for the banks to loan out. So if people save more, the supply shifts to the right. If people are like, oh, I want to go borrow money, the demand for loanable funds then increases. Let's say people withdraw money. They don't want to save anymore. They want to go spend. Well, the supply shifts to the left. There's not as much of a fund available. The intersection of the two is the interest rate or the price of money. Look through the practice problems. Very helpful. Look at the answer keys. Come ask me if you have questions. Now you're basically ready to study for the AP test. Hopefully take the AP test. Go through the practice questions in these packets. And my last piece of advice, study the graphs. Go through the packets and just say, okay, I'm going to draw all the graphs at different times. I'm not going to just go monopsony and monopoly and just start drawing all of them together and just maybe have flashcards and say, okay, if I hear the word monopsony, what does that look like? If I hear product market monopoly, what does that graph look like? That is going to be your biggest asset. Finally, the last chance at a raffle ticket. Tell me that I am happy that the review sessions are recorded and over, and good luck on the test.